I was standing in the middle of the gallery, the soft lights glinting off gold frames and polished floors, when my breath caught in my throat. There it was, my painting. The little watercolor I made when I was 6 years old, sitting on the splintered porch of a rental house my mother could barely afford. The tag beneath it said, "Price $750,000. And the gallery owner, with his perfect hair and perfect smile, was laughing in my face. "Impossible," he said, waving a hand like I was some overeager tourist. "That painting is far beyond your reach." Those were the exact words. Far beyond your reach. He didn't know who I was, or what that painting meant, or the message hidden on the back of that canvas. He didn't know I was the little girl who painted it. And he had no idea what would happen next. Hours earlier, the day had begun like any other. I had just finished my shift at the Marine Corps base, mostly routine security reviews and coordinating schedules with the younger MPs who still thought the Corps was one big action movie. The paperwork was endless, and my shoulders ached from wearing the vest all day, but I didn't mind. Serving gave me structure. It gave me purpose. It gave me something to be proud of after a childhood where pride was rare. The assignment had popped up unexpectedly. The City Art Gallery, a place I had never stepped into in my entire 32 years, was hosting a fundraising event for military families and veterans. They needed extra security support, not because the crowd was dangerous, but because the pieces were expensive. "You're good with people," my lieutenant had said, "and you won't be intimidated by the donors." I had laughed. People with money didn't intimidate me, they just rarely impressed me. I agreed. It felt meaningful. And if I'm honest, it was nice to be asked to represent the Corps for something elegant, not just emergencies and disputes on base. The gallery was nicer than anything I grew up around. Tall ceilings, warm, lighting the faint scent of lemon polish and old wood. Guests wandered in slow clusters, sipping champagne, murmuring about brushstrokes and provenance. I walked the perimeter in my Marine Corps dress blues, nodding politely. A few people smiled at me warmly, thanking me for my service. Older veterans approached specifically to shake my hand. Those interactions always touched me more than I let on. My mother loved places like this. When I was a kid, she used to take me to free museum days. We didn't have money for anything big, but she would pack peanut butter sandwiches and walk with me through rooms full of paintings while telling stories about the artists. I used to imagine growing up and painting something that would hang on a wall like that, something people would stop and stare at. But life had other plans. When you're evicted twice before age 10 and food stamps fill your fridge, art becomes a luxury you cannot afford. The painting I made when I was 6, the one with the big oak tree and the yellow dog and the crooked sun, was the last piece I poured my heart into. My mother submitted it to a local children's art show. It never came back. She told me it must have been misplaced. I cried that night thinking I had done something wrong. She held me and whispered, "Sometimes the world takes things, honey, but it can never take your talent." I hadn't thought about that painting in years. Decades, really. Life had swept me up basic training deployments, late-night duty shifts, the steady hum of adulthood and responsibility. My paintbrushes ended up in a box somewhere. My childhood was stored away with them. But then, I turned a corner in the gallery, and there it was. I recognized it instantly, my childish strokes, the uneven grass line, the little heart I hid in the tree bark, a secret message I thought only my mom would see. And more importantly, I knew what was written on the back. My mother had insisted that every piece of art I made should carry a signature, but I was 6 and could barely spell my name. So she suggested something else. "Write a message only we would know," she said. "A message that tells the world who made it, even if someone takes it." My message was simple, written in wobbly blue crayon, "This is for Mom, L." Seeing the painting now felt like being thrown backward in time. My chest tightened, my eyes stung. The years between 6 and 32 collapsed into a single heartbeat. I stepped closer, my gloved hand lifting toward the frame without touching it. That's when the gallery owner approached. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with someone who expected the world to treat him gently. He looked at me like I had wandered into a private dinner. "Can I help you, Sergeant?" he asked, though his tone suggested he preferred the answer, "no." I pointed at the painting. Where did this come from? He gave a vague explanation about donors and private collectors. When I whispered, "This is my painting," he paused only briefly before chuckling. "Oh no," he said, patting the air like calming a child. "This piece is from a very prestigious collection. You must be mistaken." I wasn't, and the dismissal that tone hit something deep inside me. Something old, something I thought I had buried. "I'm not mistaken," I said firmly. "I painted this." Other guests began to look over. The owner's smile tightened. "Security," he said softly, snapping his fingers. 2 guards approached, uncomfortable once they saw my uniform. "Ma'am, we need you to step back." I should have backed down. I should have avoided the scene. But that painting wasn't just a picture. It was the last piece of my childhood. The last memory untouched by eviction notices and fear and hunger. So I said the one thing that changed everything. "Check the back of the canvas." The owner scowled. "I don't have time for games." "It's not a game," I said, my voice steady. "My message is there. A message only a 6-year-old could write." The guards hesitated. The owner refused. The tension tightened like a wire. And that was the moment right there when I realized I was done being dismissed. By him. By anyone. This wasn't just about a painting. This was about the truth. The moment the gallery owner refused to look at the back of the canvas, something shifted inside me. Something old, something familiar. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the same quiet, steady feeling I used to get as a child when someone tried to take advantage of my mother. That slow, burning certainty that if I didn't stand my ground, no one else would. Guests were starting to murmur now. A woman in pearls whispered, "Why won't he just check it?" A man near the champagne table leaned closer, curiosity sharpening his expression. The owner saw the eyes settling on us and stiffened. His voice dropped to a hiss. "You are embarrassing yourself," he said, "and my patrons." I straightened my posture, not in defiance but in discipline. Marines don't slouch. "Sir, I'm asking for a simple inspection. If the message isn't there, I'll leave quietly." His jaw tightened. Security. The 2 guards, a pair of young men who couldn't have been more than 22, shifted awkwardly. They recognized the Marine Corps uniform, and I could tell they didn't want a confrontation any more than I did. One of them cleared his throat. "Sir, maybe we should just—" "No," the owner snapped. "Remove her." The young guard's eyes darted to mine. He mouthed a quick sorry, then reached toward my arm, barely touching it. I stepped back calmly. "I'm not refusing to leave," I said loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "but I am asking for verification before I do. Because that painting belongs to me. It was stolen when I was a child." A ripple moved through the room. People were listening now. The owner's face reddened. "Nonsense. This piece has documented provenance." "Then show it," I said. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his back as if the conversation were over, like he could dismiss me from reality, the same way he dismissed my claim. But something else was happening in that gallery. The crowd, made up mostly of older Americans, veterans, military families, retirees with lifelong stories etched into their faces, began shifting closer, forming a semicircle behind me. They weren't the kind of people who took kindly to arrogance. A woman with silver hair stepped forward. "Let the Marine speak," she said calmly. The owner froze. He hadn't expected a witness, much less a sympathetic one. I took a breath. My voice steadied, softened. "When I was 6, my mother entered my painting in a children's art contest. We were living in a tiny rental on Maple Street. The painting disappeared after the contest, no explanation, no apology. My mother cried harder than I did. We didn't have much, but she held on to every piece of my art because she wanted me to believe I had potential." I swallowed. The memories pressed hard against my ribs. I know this painting. I know the brush strokes. I know every tiny detail because I painted it with more hope than I understood at that age. And on the back is a message I wrote in blue crayon. My mother told me to sign everything I made with a secret note so no one could claim it wasn't mine. The room had gone completely quiet. For a moment the owner seemed unsure, like he had lost control of the situation and didn't know how to get it back. Finally he forced a stiff smile. "This is absurd. If we let every person claiming ownership disrupt our events, we wouldn't be able to operate." He waved a hand at the guards again. Escort her out. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably. Sir, he muttered, maybe we should... Out, the owner barked. And that's when the older woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward again, her voice gentle but unyielding. Young man, do you truly want to eject a Marine from a military fundraiser without verifying her claim? In front of all these people? The guard froze. The owner's eyes darted around the room. He could feel the shift. Losing face among wealthy patrons was one thing. Losing face among an older crowd of veterans and military supporters was another entirely. Still, pride clung to him like wet cloth. I don't have time for theatrics, he said. We have a schedule. Then I'll make the time, I said quietly. The owner spun around. Excuse me. I said, I'll make the time. I stepped closer, not confrontational, but undeniably firm. You want to dismiss me? Fine. But if you're so confident this painting isn't mine, then checking the back of the canvas shouldn't take more than a few seconds. A few guests nodded. Someone murmured, just check it. But the owner had painted himself into a corner. If he checked and I was wrong, he would humiliate me. But if he checked and I was right, then everything he said, everything he assumed would fall apart in front of everyone. He chose pride. No, remove her. This time the guards had no choice. They gently took me by the arms, not forcefully, but insistently. Embarrassment burned through me, a familiar sting from childhood, the feeling of being pushed aside because of who I wasn't. But as they guided me toward the doorway, something unexpected happened. Wait, one of the guests said. A man in his 70s, cane in hand, Vietnam veteran pin gleaming on his lapel. Let the girl check the back. Another voice chimed in, then another. Within seconds, nearly the entire room was speaking softly but firmly, pressuring the owner to do the simple thing he'd refused. It didn't sway him, but it did something else. It lit something inside me, resolve. The kind I had relied on through years of service deployments, losses, and victories. The kind that didn't rise from anger, but from righteousness. As the guards escorted me out the front door, I didn't fight them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I simply looked back one last time at the painting that held my childhood inside its worn canvas. And I made a silent promise. I'm coming back for you. The cool night air hit my face as the guards guided me outside, their hands no longer touching me, but hovering nearby like they wanted to show the gallery owner they were doing their jobs without actually disrespecting a Marine. One of them, the younger blonde kid with nervous eyes, finally exhaled. Ma'am, I'm really sorry about that, he said quietly. I nodded. You're just doing what you were told. He hesitated, glancing back through the glass doors. I believed you, he whispered. The other guard gave him a sharp look, but the blonde one continued anyway. I saw your face when you looked at that painting. People don't fake that. Then he shifted awkwardly. If it were me, I wouldn't let this go. Neither would I. Thank you, I said softly. They stepped back, letting me walk freely into the parking lot. The gallery facade glowed behind me, all warm lights and polished windows, a place that looked welcoming on the outside, but inside arrogance rotted beneath the surface. My hands trembled not from anger, but from the sudden rush of memory. The painting. The porch. My mother's voice telling me to keep drawing even when we could barely afford crayons. I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My reflection in the windshield showed a Marine in full dress blues decorations glinting faintly. But beneath the uniform, I was still that little girl who had created something from hope, from innocence, from love. And someone had stolen it. I took a breath, started the engine, and drove straight to my mother's apartment. She lived in a modest senior housing complex, clean, safe, and small. I still paid part of her rent, even though she insisted she could manage on her own. When I knocked, she opened the door with her usual tired smile. You're out late in uniform, she said, stepping aside. Long day. I walked inside, and for a moment I didn't know how to start. How do you tell your mother that a piece of your shared past, something she mourned losing, was not only still in existence, but hanging on a gallery wall with a price tag larger than everything we ever owned put together? Mom, I said finally, I saw something tonight. She set down the mug she had been holding, her eyebrows folded in concern. What happened? I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I had managed to snap before security intervened. When I handed it to her, her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh," her voice cracked. "Oh my, is that—" "Yes," I said quietly, "it's mine." Her eyes watered instantly. She traced the photo with trembling fingers. The tree, the yellow dog, the little sun. She let out a soft laugh, a painful, joyful sound. "I haven't seen this in so long." I sat beside her on the couch. "Mom, how did it disappear?" She closed her eyes. The memories clearly pained her. "You remember the eviction on Maple Street," she whispered. "You were too young to understand how quickly everything happened. The landlord was furious about the late payment. He threw most of our things into the hallway. Some went missing, well, I think he kept them." I remembered the shouting, the fear, the feeling of helplessness, the landlord with the thick mustache and the cold eyes. "He took it," I said, my jaw tightening. "I'm almost certain." She wiped tears with the back of her hand. "He knew I treasured your art. He used to mock it, mock us. And now it's being sold for $750,000, I said. The number hung heavy in the room. My mother let out a shaky sigh. "Honey, this wasn't about money. It never was." I cried that night because I knew losing that painting would break your heart. I swallowed hard. It did. She reached over and held my hand. "You've handled bigger battles than this. But this one is personal." I squeezed her hand back. "I need to know how it ended up there. I need to know who's profiting from it." She nodded. "Then start with the gallery. Demand provenance." I tried, I said. They refused, threw me out. My mother pulled herself straighter, her voice suddenly firm. "Then you push harder. But remember, don't lose your integrity over this. You've worked too hard to become the woman you are." I stayed with her another half hour, comforting her, letting her process the shock of seeing a piece of my childhood reborn in such an unexpected way. When I finally left, the weight of purpose sat heavy on my shoulders, but so did the weight of memory. On the drive home, I began forming a plan. If the gallery had legitimate documentation, they would have shown it. The refusal was telling, and if this painting passed through auctions or dealers, there would be a trail. Art doesn't just appear. It travels. Enough hands had likely touched it that someone would remember where it came from. I parked outside my apartment, but instead of going in, I sat with my phone in hand, scrolling through search results for art auctions in our city over the last 25 years. It didn't take long to find something interesting. A small estate sale company that had been operating back in the early 2000s had once belonged to, of all people, my former landlord's brother. My pulse quickened. Pieces were starting to align. By the time I went inside, I had already decided tomorrow my investigation would begin. Officially or unofficially, I'd find the truth. For myself, for my mother, for the child who had poured her heart into that painting. But that night, as I undressed and folded my uniform carefully, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the gallery owner's laugh, his dismissive wave, the guard's hesitance, the crowd's murmurs. He thought I would walk away. He didn't know me at all. I don't walk away from what's mine. Morning came with a dull gray sky and the kind of cold that seeps into a person's bones, but I felt sharp awake, driven. I put on my service alphas, still formal enough to command respect, but practical for moving around the city, and brewed a cup of strong coffee before heading out. Today wasn't just another errand or task. It was the beginning of something bigger. I could feel it in the tightness of my shoulders and the set of my jaw. People think Marines are fueled by adrenaline or defiance, but the real engine underneath us is purpose, and I had found mine. My first stop was the public library. Older Americans still love libraries, and so do I. Quiet places where things are documented, logged, preserved. There's something comforting about the fact that paper can hold truths people try to hide. I headed straight for the newspaper archives, scrolling through microfilm and digital clippings, until I found the name I remembered: Maple Street Storage and Estate Sales, owned by Daniel Thorne, the brother of the landlord who evicted us. There it was, a yellowed article from 2003 showing Daniel smiling proudly beside stacks of household items, claiming he rescued forgotten belongings from ungrateful tenants. The phrasing made my stomach twist. If he had taken my painting, it likely ended up in his estate sale pipeline, sold for pocket change, resurfacing again and again until it reached the polished walls of last night's gallery. I copied every reference I could find, filled pages in my notebook, and traced the chain of ownership as far as public records allowed. Eventually, everything pointed to one name, Richard Halden, a real estate developer, with the kind of wealth that buys silence and respect in places like that gallery. He was listed as a major anonymous donor, but anonymity rarely stays intact when you know where to look. I stepped outside, the wind whipping my hair. Across the street stood a small diner, the kind filled with retirees and local workers who knew everyone's business. I ordered black coffee, sat in a booth, and made a few calls. Most led nowhere. But one to an old Marine buddy now working in private security hit pay dirt. "Oh, Halden," he said through the phone. "Yeah, he's into estate auctions, buys up old storage units. Says it's a hobby, but honestly, I think he just likes owning things other people lost." I closed my eyes. Lost things, like a little girl's painting. "Why do you ask?" he added. "I think he has something of mine," I said. There was a pause. "You want me to run a quiet background pull?" "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. I need to approach him the right way." After finishing my coffee, I drove to the gallery. It wasn't open yet, but that didn't matter. I stood across the street watching as staff unlocked the doors and wheeled in carts of brochures. The memory of being escorted out the night before still burned in my chest. I didn't go in, not yet. I needed more than emotion, I needed proof. On the way back to my car, a familiar voice called out, "Sergeant." I turned. It was the older woman from the event, the one who had stood up for me. She wore a neat winter coat and carried a reusable grocery bag. There was strength in her posture, the quiet strength of someone who had lived a long life and had no time for nonsense. "I hoped I'd see you again," she said. "Ma'am, thank you for what you said last night," I replied. "I appreciate it more than you know." She waved a hand. "Please. My husband served 30 years. I can spot arrogance and truth from across a room." Her eyes softened. "Did you get anywhere with them?" I shook my head. "Not yet, but I'm working on it." She studied me a moment. "Don't give up. Some of us grew up in times when people like that gallery owner ran everything. They counted on us being quiet. Times have changed. Don't let him shrink you." Her words landed with surprising weight. Before we parted, she gently squeezed my hand. "If you need someone to vouch for your behavior last night, you have my number." I thanked her again and got into my car feeling unexpectedly bolstered. My next stop was my mother's place. I wanted her nearby as I took the next steps, and truthfully, I wanted to see her face again to ground myself. When she opened the door, she looked worried but hopeful. "You're back early," she said. "I'm working on it," I replied. "I found the chain of owners. It leads to a developer named Halden." My mother's mouth tightened. I've heard that name. He was involved in buying up foreclosed properties years ago. Not a kind man. "I'm going to request to speak with him," I said. She touched my cheek. "Be careful. Men like that protect their fortunes more fiercely than their consciences." I spent the next hour gathering documents, childhood photos, scans of my old art contest entry form, even a blurry picture of that porch where I had painted under the morning sun. With everything assembled in a folder, I made the call. A gatekeeper answered immediately. "Mr. Halden's office." I introduced myself, mentioned I was a Marine, and requested a meeting regarding a piece in his collection. The assistant hesitated. "He doesn't take unscheduled appointments." "I understand," I said calmly, "but this concerns stolen property." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll see what I can do." 5 minutes later she returned. "Mr. Halden can give you 10 minutes tomorrow morning." 10 minutes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. That night I barely slept. I lay awake thinking about everything: my mother's sacrifices, the eviction, the humiliation in the gallery, and that painting that had somehow survived the chaos of my childhood. I wondered if Halden even knew where it came from, or if it was simply another acquisition to decorate his walls. The next morning arrived with frost on my windshield. I wore my uniform not for intimidation but for clarity, for truth. When I arrived at Halden's office, I found myself in a lobby filled with glossy marble floors and abstract sculptures. Wealth radiated from the walls. A receptionist guided me to a conference room. And then he walked in. Richard Halden was in his 60s, fit, silver-haired, and carrying himself like a man used to being obeyed. But when he saw my uniform, his expression flickered an almost imperceptible shift. "Sergeant," he said, shaking my hand. "My assistant tells me you believe a painting in my collection belongs to you." "Yes," I said, "I do." I opened my folder and began to lay out the evidence, the childhood photo, the entry form, the porch snapshot. His eyes sharpened with interest, then something else. Discomfort. "I purchased that piece at a storage unit auction 20 years ago," he said slowly. "The man selling it claimed the previous tenants abandoned everything." "They didn't abandon it," I replied. "It was taken during an eviction." Halden leaned back, exhaling long and low. I didn't know. His voice softened, not defensive, not cruel, but thoughtful. And for the first time I saw a crack in the wall of privilege. A place where truth might slip through. Halden didn't speak for several seconds. He sat there, hands clasped, eyes drifting toward the window, as if the past 20 years were suddenly rearranging themselves in his mind. When he finally looked at me again, his expression had shifted, not hostile, not guarded, but cautious. "Sergeant," he began slowly, "I have acquired many pieces over the years, some from auctions, some from estate clearances, some donated. I won't pretend to remember every one of them, but that painting, I do remember it." I held my breath. "It was in a box of children's drawings," he continued. "Most were scribbles. But that one yours stood out. There was something earnest about it." Earnest. That was the right word for a 6-year-old trying to paint a world that felt safe. "Did the seller tell you where it came from?" I asked. He shook his head. "Storage units rarely come with stories, Sergeant. Just leftover fragments of someone else's life." Fragments. That word stung more than I expected. He leaned back, studying me. "But it seems this fragment meant something to you." "More than you know," I said. I told him about the eviction, about the landlord shouting while my mother clung to the few belongings we had, about the nights when I thought poverty was my fault somehow, when I didn't understand how adults could be so cruel. And about that painting, the only thing from my childhood made out of joy rather than fear or survival. Halden listened without interrupting. To my surprise, he seemed genuinely unsettled, not defensive, not dismissive, not like the gallery owner who saw me as an inconvenience, but like a man who realized he might be standing in the wrong side of a story for once. When I finished, he exhaled again. "I didn't know," he said softly, "but I can see how deeply it affected you." I nodded. "I just want it back." He hesitated. "The painting is currently on loan to the gallery, part of the exhibition." "Yes," I said, "where they tried to throw me out for recognizing my own work." His jaw tightened. "They what?" I repeated what happened in detail, the gallery owner's laugh, the dismissal, the call for security. Something almost like anger flickered across Halden's eyes. "No one should be treated that way," he said, "least of all someone serving this country." "I don't need special treatment," I replied, "just fairness." Halden stood abruptly. "Let me call them." He stepped out of the room. I heard the muffled rise of his voice through the door. The tone wasn't loud, but it was unmistakably sharp, controlled fury. After a long minute he returned, looking both resolved and troubled. "I told them to take the painting off display," he said, "effective immediately." My heart lifted, then steadied. There was always a catch. "However," he continued, "art transactions can be complicated. The gallery technically holds custodianship during the exhibition period, but I retain ownership." He met my eyes. "If I return it to you formally, I want the documentation to be airtight. No loopholes. No future claimant can challenge your right to it." It took me a second to understand that he was not refusing. He was agreeing. Carefully. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded once. "Come back tomorrow morning. I'll have my legal advisor prepare the necessary release forms. You'll walk out with the painting legitimately yours." I rose to leave, but something tugged at me. "Mr. Halden," I said, "why are you helping me?" He paused. A deep, reflective pause. "When I was a boy," he said slowly, "my sister painted. She wasn't talented, not really, but she loved it. Our father threw her artwork away whenever he found it. Said it was a waste of space." He let out a breath. A child's creation deserves respect, even if the world doesn't see its value. I softened. Sometimes the hardest men have the deepest wounds. He extended his hand. Until tomorrow, Sergeant. I shook it. Tomorrow. As I walked out of the building, a feeling spread through me, something between relief and rising tension. I had taken a step forward, but I wasn't at the finish line yet. There was still the gallery owner, still the humiliation, still the stolen years wrapped inside that canvas. I drove home with the radio off, letting silence fill the car. My mother was waiting at her window when I arrived. She opened the door before I reached it. "Well," she asked. "I found the owner," I said. "He didn't know how the painting was taken, but he's returning it." Her hands covered her face as she sank onto the couch. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "After all these years." I sat beside her. "We'll have it back tomorrow." She grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Honey, don't let bitterness grow in you. Get what's yours, but let the anger go. You've seen too much darkness already." I nodded. But some small part of me still smoldered, not with vengeance, but with the need for accountability. Someone had profited from my childhood loss. Someone had belittled me publicly. And even if I regained the painting, the stain of that humiliation still lingered. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "This is Eleanor from the gallery last night. I saw the owner arguing with a donor this morning. Something is happening. Call me if you need a statement." I stared at the message. Support was gathering around me, unexpected, powerful quiet. I exhaled slowly. Tomorrow I would retrieve the painting. But after that, the truth needed to be told. Not for revenge, but for closure. The next morning dawned brighter than the day before, one of those crisp, clear American mornings when the air feels clean and the sky seems too blue to hold anything heavy. But my chest was tight with anticipation. Today I would retrieve the painting. Today a piece of my childhood would come home. I drove to Halden's office in full uniform again. Not for show, uniforms aren't props, but because it reminded me who I was, someone who had fought for her country, her family, and herself. Someone who no longer let people dismiss her the way that gallery owner had. Halden's receptionist greeted me politely and led me to the same conference room. A large cardboard box sat on the table, carefully padded and sealed. My breath caught. He entered moments later and gave me a nod that was both formal and strangely warm. "Sergeant," he said, "the paperwork is ready." His attorney, a thin woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, walked me through the legal release. It acknowledged that Halden transferred full ownership to me at no cost, recognized the painting as originally created by L. Minor Child, and certified that the transfer superseded all previous claims. No loopholes, no ambiguity, no traps. When I signed the final page, a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying slid off my shoulders. Halden watched me, then clasped his hands together. "I hope this helps restore something you lost," he said. "It does," I replied, "more than you know." He hesitated, then added softly, "I'm sorry, Sergeant, truly." I believed him, not because his words were eloquent, but because they weren't. They sounded like the truth. I lifted the box carefully, feeling its weight light, almost shockingly so, for something that had carried 26 years of memory loss and longing. My mother cried when I brought it to her apartment. Her hands trembled as she opened the top flap and saw the painting again, the sunlight catching the faint strokes only a child could make. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "you brought it home." We sat together for a long time, studying it as if it were a newborn child or a letter from someone long gone. When she turned it over, her breath hitched at the sight of the little blue crayon message. "You wrote this with such pride," she murmured, "and now look at you." I didn't cry often. Marines learn to pack emotions into neat compartments. But in that moment, sitting beside my mother with my childhood in her hands, tears slipped down my cheeks. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Once she calmed, I told her gently, "Mom, I'm going to tell the full story. Not to shame anyone, but to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to another kid." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "It's your voice now, honey. Use it right." I left her apartment with the box in my passenger seat. I didn't want the painting out of sight, not even for a second. I drove home, placed it on my dining table, and took several photos. My plan was forming clearly now. I needed to document every step, every detail, every piece of truth. Not for revenge, for transparency. That evening, Eleanor, the older woman from the gallery, called me. "I just wanted to check on you," she said. "Did you get your painting?" "I did," I said, "thanks to the donor." There was a pause on her end. "I saw the gallery owner this morning. He looked rattled. I think Halden confronted him." "Good," I replied. "He deserved to be confronted." She cleared her throat softly. "If you're planning to speak publicly, I'd like to give a statement. What he did was wrong. I saw everything." Her offer struck me deeply. I had expected to fight alone. Instead, kindness kept showing up in unexpected places like lanterns lighting a dark road. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That means a lot." After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen counter, the weight of justice, not anger, settling in my chest. The truth had a way of gathering its own army. The next morning, before I even finished my coffee, a reporter knocked on my door. He was older, late 60s, wearing a worn veteran ball cap and a windbreaker. He introduced himself as Tom Reynolds from the local paper. "I heard from Eleanor," he said. "She thought you might be willing to talk." I invited him in. Something about him felt safe, maybe the way he moved slowly, or the way he called me ma'am with genuine respect, not obligation. He studied the painting for a long time before speaking. "You know," he said, "art has a way of surviving what people don't." He lifted his gaze. "Tell me what happened." So I did. I told him everything: the eviction, the gallery's dismissal, the humiliation, the refusal to check the back of the canvas, the chain of ownership, Halden's genuine shift, and the return of the painting. He didn't interrupt, he didn't dramatize, he simply listened. When I finished, he nodded solemnly. "People need to hear this," he said. "Not for scandal, but for truth." His article went live the next day. The headline wasn't flashy, it wasn't vengeful. It simply read, "Marine reunited with childhood painting after decades, a story of loss, dignity, and restoration." It spread faster than anyone expected. Veterans shared it. Art teachers shared it. People who had lost belongings in evictions or disasters shared it. Not with outrage, but with empathy. And then, when the gallery owner tried to defend himself publicly, the backlash was immediate. People weren't angry at him for owning the painting. They were angry for how he had treated me, for dismissing me, mocking me, calling security on me instead of listening. His apology came 2 days later. Written, formal, stiff, but it came. I didn't respond. Not every apology needs acknowledgement. Some just need to exist. That night I sat at my dining table with the painting, tracing the cracked edges and the faded crayon. The house was quiet. My uniform hung neatly in the hall closet. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me, like a door slowly opening to a room I had forgotten existed. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll do something I haven't done since I was a child. I'll pick up a paintbrush. The next morning, I cleared off my small kitchen table, laid down an old sheet, and set out the supplies I'd bought the night before. A few brushes, a basic acrylic, set a blank canvas. It had been decades since I'd really painted. This felt different. This was me quietly saying, "I'm still here." I propped my childhood painting against the wall where I could see it. The crooked tree, the yellow dog, the clumsy sun, the little heart in the bark, the blue crayon message on the back, "This is for Mom." L. It had survived eviction, storage units, auctions, strangers' walls. Maybe I had too. For a while I just stared at the blank canvas. I'd faced things in uniform that would make most people tremble, but this simple white rectangle made me hesitate. Questions older folks know too well crept in. Is it too late? Am I foolish for trying? Then I heard my mother's voice in memory. As long as you're breathing, you haven't missed your chance. So I picked up the brush. The first stroke was shaky, the second steadier. I didn't try to copy the old painting. I let my hand say what it needed to say now. Trees and sky again, but with shadows this time, and light bending the way it really does. Not perfect, not professional, just honest. When I finally stepped back, there were 2 paintings in front of me, one from the 6-year-old who painted out of hope, and one from the woman who had walked through fire and still believed in color. My phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. "I read the article again," she said. A lot of us have lost things we never got back. Homes, keepsakes, people. Seeing you fight to reclaim something from your childhood that meant more than you realize. It wasn't just about the painting, I said. It was about not letting someone else decide what my story is worth. I know, she replied. That's why I called. Our church does a little community evening once a month. Local artists and veterans bring whatever they're working on. Coffee cookies, folding chairs. If you ever want to bring your painting, or both, you'd be welcome. I looked at the two canvases, one old, one new. I think I'd like that, I said. A few weeks later, I carried both paintings into that church basement. The room was plain, the people were not. Neighbors, grandparents, a couple of teenagers, a Vietnam vet with kind eyes, folks who knew what it meant to lose pieces of themselves along the way. Tom the reporter came too, no notebook this time, just his ball cap and a quiet smile. My mother sat near the front. When I set the old painting on the easel, she let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for 20 years. I put the new one beside it. Eleanor tapped a spoon against a mug. Tonight, she said, we have a story. Not about villains and heroes, about loss and what happens when something dear finds its way home again. They turned to me. I've briefed officers and addressed Marines before deployments, but this felt different. This wasn't orders. This was my life. I told them the story, the eviction, the missing painting, the night at the gallery, the laughter, the humiliation, the refusal to check the back, the donor who listened, the painting coming home, the moment I picked up a brush again. When I finished, the room was quiet in that deep way that means people are actually hearing you. The Vietnam vet cleared his throat. You did more than get a painting back, he said. You claimed your story. A lot of us never get to do that. I thought of Halden, how he could have hidden behind lawyers and contracts but didn't. I thought of the gallery owner too, forced to face his own arrogance in front of the very community he wanted to impress. I didn't want to destroy anyone, I said. I just wanted the truth to stand on its own 2 feet. Later, people came up to look at the paintings. Some smiled, some wiped their eyes. One older gentleman lingered. Before we decide somebody is beneath us, he said we ought to remember we don't know what they've survived, or what they've created. Could be we're judging a frame without knowing the story behind the brushstrokes. I smiled. I think I needed to learn that too. On my way home, I drove past the art gallery. The lights were on. People in nice clothes moved inside. For a moment, I wondered if the owner would think about how close he came to burying the truth under a price tag. Maybe he would. Maybe he wouldn't. It didn't matter anymore. The revenge I'd imagined at the beginning, seeing him shamed and ruined, no longer held much appeal. He'd been corrected. The story had been told. The people who needed to see his behavior had seen it. That was enough. The real victory wasn't his fall. It was my restoration. When I got home, I hung the childhood painting in my mother's apartment where she could see it every morning. I kept the new one in my own living room, a quiet promise that I wouldn't pack my gifts away again just because life got hard. Even after everything, there were still blank canvases waiting. If you've stayed with me to the end of this story, maybe some part of it rang true for you. Maybe you lost something long ago, a home, a keepsake, a dream, and never got it back. Maybe someone laughed at what mattered to you or told you it was beyond your reach, and a part of you believed them. If that's you, I hope you'll hear this clearly. It is never too late to reclaim your worth. You may not be able to recover what was taken, but you can still tell the truth about what it meant. You can still stand up with quiet dignity and say, that mattered, I mattered, and I still do. If this story stirred something in you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that their story isn't finished yet. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this of quiet justice, hard-earned healing, and the long road back to yourself, I'd be honored to have you listen and walk that road with me. Because in the end, revenge isn't really about making someone else small. It's about refusing to let anyone keep you small ever again. 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 Ever